Okay, we will call our city commission meeting. This is an equalization meeting. To order at 7 p.m. April 9th, 2025. We have Commissioner Ralston, Iverson, and myself here, so we do have a quorum. One thing on the agenda, but we go modification or approval of the agenda.
I will make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as written. I'll move to a vote.
Yeah.
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, new business. Property assessments. Lady, the floor is yours.
Good evening. My name is Leah. I am the local assessor for the city of Tioga. I have brought with me Christy Gutierrez. She is another one of the assessors in our office. I've handed out the city of Tioga property assessment report book, and I'll go over this with you. If there is any questions during the report, please feel free to stop me and we can go over any of those questions. There will come a point in the meeting where we will open it to the floor so that anybody in the audience can ask any questions or delve into any information that they need. So on page 1, you'll see your 2024 City of Tioga levy sheet. I like to include this just so that you guys can see kind of where your levy is sitting and where values from the specific valuations in the City of Tioga are going. Page 2 is our overview and kind of our sales analysis. So the state requires that we look at each individual area, each individual year for state assessments. So the true and full value is defined as the market value, if any, the earning capacity, and also any other matters that affect value. So each city so the city of Tioga is checked yearly, and we try and look at what their true and full is using a method called sales assessment ratio. The ratio is a statistical measure of actual assessment to actual sales price. This year, every year, the state board considers any ratio that exceeds 90 and is below 100 to be 100% true and full. The time period of our assessments is very important. We look at all 2025 assessments based on 2024 information. So from January 1st of 2024 to December 31st of 2024 is how we look at our 2025 assessment. So we're always a year behind. So each year we analyze sales from the previous year to determine the current year's assessments. If a property sale is higher or lower than what our current true and full value is, we make every effort to contact that buyer and that seller sometimes to see if there were any extenuating circumstances as to why that sale might not be usable. So if it was from a family to a family member, a distress sale due to tax foreclosure, or if they've used a quick claim deed, we unfortunately cannot use any of those sales and they are rejected in our analysis. An arm's length transaction is going to be a knowing buyer and a knowing seller, and there are going to be nothing about that sale that screams to us that it's not open or an arm's length transaction. So if we have something like a remodel or it's not offered on the open market, those are again things that we can reject them in our sales analysis. So looking at our sales for 2024, which our 2025 assessment is based on, we still had a very active market throughout the county. We're seeing a new homes being built and growth all over the county as well. The city of Tioga had 14 usable residential sales during 2024 with a median ratio of 90.31%. So we look at all different aspects of a home and we analyze each individual aspect to make sure that we are using the best information to place those assessments for the current year. So we look at square footage, the style of home, construction, condition, location, all of those different things. In our commercial sales ratio, we had 10 usable sales in 2024. Unfortunately, the state does require that we have 30 usable sales. So we were required to go back to 2023 information and 2022 information. So for this 3-year sales ratio, we used for our 2025 assessments, we were looking at an overall commercial ratio of 95% after some adjustments. In looking at the city of Tioga much more closely, you're seeing an increase of over 50% of those commercial properties. This does not include the gas plant or anything that our company, Thomas Y. Pickett, assesses for us. They assess all gas plants, saltwater disposals, things like that. We've tried before to use the income approach on apartments here in the city of Tioga. Unfortunately, we removed the city of Tioga from the income approach due to a lack of data that was returned. When I first started doing income approach for the city of Tioga, we had a really good turnout. I had over 50% of my apartments that would return their data. Year before last, I had 1 apartment complex return data. So unfortunately, they had to be moved back to the replacement cost new. I unfortunately could not create a market out of 1 data analysis. We continue to give an economic obsolescence to the hotels and motels in here in Tioga of 30%, and that's just a location obsolescence. Manufactured homes. Manufactured homes on the, what we call the permit system, are kind of assessed in a different manner. They are individually owned, but the land is owned by someone separate. So if you have them in a mobile home park, or they're sitting on someone's land, but it's Joe Jr.'s mobile home, but Joe Sr.'s land, if they are deeded differently, we unfortunately cannot assess them together because the ownership is not the same. So in the city of Tioga, you have 30 mobile homes on the permit system. And they are different because they are assessed and the real property in the taxes are paid in January for the coming year. Whereas for real estate, you're paying the previous year. So in December, you would be paying 24s, but in January for a mobile home on permit, you would be paying 24s. You're always ahead of the game with a mobile home on permit. You're always behind the game for a real estate property. So page number 5 is just my recommendations to leave both classes as a property presented or a class presented. And we'll dive into a little bit more details here. Page 6, I like to give this to you so that you can see a snapshot of what's happened in the city. So you can see that we used 42 usable sales for a ratio of 95%. The city of Tioga did see an increase of almost 57%. It just depended on what property we were looking at. And then your Tioga ratio, residential ratio is 90.31 with 14 usable sales. Mobile homes decreased on average about 21%. Pre-2000, so anything built prior to 2000 decreased on average about 12%. Anything post, so anything built from 2001 until now, increased on average about 6%. And the Tioga townhomes increased on average about 6%. I did send out 150 notices to the residents here in the city of Tioga. And I have a list of those further in the report. City of Tioga on page 7 does have a little bit of agricultural land. Agricultural land is done completely different than any other assessment that we have here in Williams County. So ag land is based specifically on the 3 main components of a formula: the capitalization rate, the ag land production, and the cost of productivity index. And NRCS gives us this data. They have a 10-year average. They throw out the lowest, they throw out the highest, and then we have that 10-year. And they send to the state kind of what's happening with those soils. Then the state gives us a list of what soil ranges should be in, and that's when we can look at what our soils need to do. Tillable soil decreased about 4% this year. Non-tillable stayed the same, which has kind of been the running trend with non-tillable. It's kind of just stagnant here the last few years. The next page is page 8, which is the property tax basis. So I give this to you guys so you guys can kind of see what goes into those taxes. Because I know inadvertently we aren't here to discuss taxes, but they will come up in some type of form. So taxes are based on this calculation of your budget, your valuation, and your taxation. And each one of those pieces goes into what your taxes are gonna be. I also like to give you an estimated tax bill based on $100,000 residential property and what your 2024 mill levy was. I see I have a clerical error there. It should say 2024 consolidated mill levy at the bottom, not 23. So in a property in the city of Tioga, this is kind of where that money is being distributed. When you have $100,000 residents. Page 9 is your overall assessment balancing sheet. This gives you an overall snapshot of what your total assessed value is, or your total true and full value across the city of Tioga. So in agricultural, you have about 155,000. Residential, including mobile homes, you have 114,458,646. And then commercial, you have 186,514,408. So for a total market value or true and full value for the city of Tioga, you'll get it about 301. Number 10 shows you kind of what has happened in the city of Tioga this year. So we decreased some farmland. What that means is it moved from farmland into either a residential classification or a commercial classification. In the residential classification, you can see that we increased land and decreased some land. So again, we either, most likely that residential land moved into the commercial classification. And then you can see that we increased a little bit of commercial land and decreased a little bit of commercial land. Again, we're just moving that from one to another, most likely a business related. I'm guessing this is probably when mobile homes out in, I think it's Skyview, moved from being a commercially assessed parcel to a residentially assessed parcel. Is kind of where we're seeing that. And then if you had any construction, any demolition, things like that are also included in this report. On page 11, you'll have your overall sales ratio statistics. And this is just going to show you that your median sales ratio for your residential is that 90.31% that we're seeing. Page 12 is a list of all of the sales that were used in our analysis this year for the city of Tioga. And then page 13 is your sales ratio map area stratification. This is how we break up the city of Tioga. We have mobile homes, anything pre-2000, post-2000, and then those townhomes. Page 14 is a list of your commercial sales here in the city of Tioga. It is from those 3 years of sales that we're using. And it's just giving you an idea of what the value. So your total value is what we had that parcel assessed at. Your sales amount is what it actually sold for. Now we get to page 15, 16, and 17. They are the credits. Please review these. We'll go through each one, but we need to review them and then have a motion for each one of these separately. Okay. The first one is homestead credit. Homestead credit is for people who are 65 years or older and under an income level of 70,000. 0 to 40,000, they receive 100% credit, which is a $9,000 taxable value discount. From 41,000 to 80 or 70,000, it is a 50%, which is a $4,500 credit on their taxable value. And this is the list of people I have on my list. So as you can see, there are a couple who have not returned applications.
I move that the finding will be made that all Williams County homestead credit applications have been reviewed by the city of Tioga Board of Equalization and find them proper as presented or corrected as noted in the minutes.
A second.
All right, got a motion and a second for the 2025 homestead credit. Any questions? Move to a vote.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that motion carries.
The next page, page 16, is your DAV credits. DAV is your disabled veterans credits. This is the list of who I currently have in the city of Tioga. And I'm not as familiar with this one as I am with the homestead credit is, just specifically, they get a discount based on their level of discharge.
Service connected disability.
Thank you.
I'll move that the finding. I move that a finding be made that all Williams County disabled veterans credit applications have been reviewed by the City of Tioga Board of Equalization and find them proper as presented or corrected as noted in the minutes. A second.
All right, we got a motion and a second for the 2025 DAV credit finding. I'll move to a vote.
Yes. Yes.
And that motion carries.
Page 17 is your privilege exemptions, which is, in this instance, most of what you have in the city of Tioga are churches, the Opportunity Foundation, low-income housing, things of that nature.
I move that a finding be made that the privileged exemptions for the City of Tioga have been reviewed by the City Tioga Board of Equalization and find them proper as presented or corrected as noted in the minutes. A second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second for the 2025 privileged exemptions finding. Move to a vote.
Yes. Yes.
And carries.
The next several pages, you'll see are the summary of parcels included in notice. I include this just as your informational pages. So now we can go ahead and open it up for any protests from the audience if you want,
I
or
just,
concerns.
I just have one. What do you want? Partial number or?
Number, address, whatever.
And I'll note it would be helpful for record purposes, once the speaker's up there and they've spoken with the evaluators or appraisers, if you could just tell us your name before you start speaking, I think that would be helpful.
Lauren Roloff.
Thank you.
Sir, sure, if you would just tell for the record, go ahead and state the address on the property too, so that I can build that.
2 Northwest Second Street, Tioga.
Okay, so Mr. Roloff, you did get a notice of increase based on the,
Yeah.
the commercial sales ratio increase in evaluations on these properties. So this is based purely on the sales ratio. So this was only increased by that ratio that was determined by our analysis to be needed to maintain that record for the state.
I guess my question was that 82%,
Certainly.
Correct.
And so,
when you were talking like 6%, 13 and.
well, 57 for commercial,
Correct,
the
but-
average.
Commercial went up 57% based on our sales ratio analysis.
Because
So if you go to prior year, the biggest thing, and I was going to note this to the commission so that they were aware. Between the years of 2023 and 2024, this property actually went down over half. So in 23, this property was at 424,000. And for this year, for 2024, it dropped to 268,940. So now this year we're back up to that 490,000. 150, yep. So this is one of those that, because there is a commercial building and also a house on that parcel, it increased significantly more than everybody else's because there are 2 separate buildings on that parcel.
What caused it to drop the year before then?
The sales analysis.
Nothing sold in Tioga then to me.
I had sales, but they were significantly lower than what I had them. They were significantly higher than what I had them assessed for, so I had to drop my analysis or my properties to match that ratio. And now, because we've had to go back 3 years and I'm using the updated analysis with current 2024 information, that's why it's now showing me that I needed that increase back.
Unfortunately, in this scenario, what you can look at and see is for the past over a decade, the valuation has stayed fairly stable. We had that huge dip last year, which makes this increase look more significant. What that really tells us when we're looking at this analysis is probably that dip last year. I don't like to use the word fluke because it is actual analysis, data analysis, but there was probably some sales in there that maybe were a little over motivated on the side of the seller that we maybe didn't catch. And so they probably should not have seen that dip last year. So what you're really seeing here, if you want to look at the big picture, is what we're seeing here is actually an increase of about $54,000 over historical valuations. And so it does, that 87%, that sticker shock, that's very jarring, and I can understand how alarming that must have been getting that notice. Overall, what it's really saying is you unfortunately probably got a little more of a dip last year than you should have. And it is unfortunate for monetary purposes. I can't imagine how hard that's going to, that fluctuation is frustrating.
Right.
And that is just the imperfection in the math model. We do the best we can with the data we have. And in this scenario, you can just see that with that dip, the data fell maybe a little short on your property. And part of that is the fact that you have a mixed class. Anytime you have those mixed classes, it's really hard to look at those because we have to decide what category we put it in, because we actually aren't allowed to assess in the mixed class. I can't just assess the residents of the residents and the business of the business. They both have to be done commercially because of the business. And so it's a unique property. It makes it a little harder to assess, and just in that scenario, typically it's.
The other property right beside it.
Yes, sir.
I see that went up too significant, but I didn't get a notice on that, but I just going on your site there, I seen that.
Okay, let's take, well, while you're here, I'd like to take a look at that one also.
Like, number 10,
Number 10. Okay.
Spectre Street. It's got
Oh, here we are. Okay, another duplex.
Yeah.
And if we look, so this one, let's take a peek at what it went up. This one, it looks like it went up. So when we were talking about those Tioga townhomes going up about that 6%, so I think Tioga townhomes went up 7%. And again, that is the average increase. Yours went up 5.7%, and that's why you didn't get a notice. The state of North Dakota required me to do a notice if it goes at 10% and $3,000.
Okay.
5.7%, it wouldn't have flagged into that requirement to do a notice. And so on that one, that is in line a little under what everybody else that class did.
Okay. So basically, my tax bill is gonna double.
It's really hard to say. So I know that it's really confusing to see that an 87% increase does not always equate an 87% tax jump. It really depends on what happens. The thing you're gonna see here, especially with this, is when you look at the valuation in Tioga, more than half of the valuation in the city of Tioga comes from commercial structures. All of those commercial structures went up about 57%. It depends on what Tioga does with their budgetary needs this year. If their budgetary needs stay in line with where they were last year, you're not going to see an 87% jump. I would not say you're not going to see a jump because those residential properties didn't increase without double. But what we do with property taxes really is the value doesn't set the property tax amount. All it does is it decides how we spread the burden.
Oh.
And so if the city of Tioga's budgetary needs stay the same, you will see an increase. It's not going to be 87%. The only way you'd see an 87% increase is that the city of Tioga's budgetary needs increase significantly, and then they had to raise their millage to a point where you would see that. I would be very surprised to see an 87% increase in your bill. The problem is that's predicting the future. I can't guarantee it, but I would be very surprised.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I wish we had better answers than that, but
No, yeah.
thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. Can I have one of these?
Yes,
You
you
may
certainly
absolutely.
can. Yes, they are for the public.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir. Thank you.
have that better with your ex-controller. So, came regarding just somewhere in a pretty big increase on our office building. Or work is pretty southeast now,
I'm sorry, what was that?
4148th Street southeast.
That's how the department goes, so I'll get that.
Okay, we'll take that in there.
So, I mean, I understand the fluctuation you explained about previously. However, like if there were abnormally low ones the year prior, how did those not get into the 3-year average this time? Or was it this year so disproportionately higher that it indeed averaged out?
Absolutely. So what ended up happening is that we had a very typical year in 2022, a low year in 2023, and a very typical year in 2024. So the one slump, what we end up doing is we use the median. So when you go through and you pull that median, typically those 2023 low numbers ended up on the bottom end of the median. All it did is it shifted our median down. It's not going to actually fully account for those. So you had 2 really good years. So 2/3 of our sales are right in line with where we are. It's those third of sales that are down the median. So if we hadn't had those 2023 sales, you would have seen no dip last year and pretty much the same valuation this year. And it's just the way it works out. We always take that median ratio. And so, like Leah was talking about, we make sure we take out anything that is not arm's length, or not offered on the open market, anything that wouldn't really indicate its actual market valuation for one reason or another. We try and take those out. And then we take what is left, we array the sales ratios in order to take that median sales ratio. And then we apply that ratio across the board to everybody in the class in order to get them within that 90 to 100%. And that's what we have to report to the state. And so anytime you're looking at that scenario, you can really never tell what that array is going to do or where that median is going to fall. In this scenario, it just didn't fall in those 2023 sales. In 2023, when we had that year, we actually mixed in vacant land sales in order to get enough value or enough properties in order to do our valuations. And I'm thinking that that may be where it maybe shifted that median in a way that kind of caused a reflection for lower valuations.
Yeah, the land values haven't changed. In years.
And that's the hard part is, in order to do a good land study, we would need to have a significant amount of vacant land sale. We're not in a market right now where vacant land is really flying off the shelf. And so it's harder to adjust those land valuations.
Fair enough. However, with the apartment is 23 7th Street west. I think that's where the last piece of building is. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah.
I noticed on this one though
And
that the previous years, there's a steady uptrend the last several years, so there wasn't a dip. There wasn't a dip last year. In fact, there was a $100,000 increase last year, and then this year it's it's 300,000. So I'm kind of curious how.
Absolutely. So when we were talking about, and we had talked about a little bit about apartments in the city of Tioga, our preference and my preference, especially when it comes to things like apartments, is to do these on the income method. What can the apartment expect to generate? One, it actually falls in line with our sales method. If somebody's buying an apartment, they're not buying it for attachment. They're not buying it because it's next to a nice school or their mother-in-law. They're buying it because they're buying an income stream. And so our sales method and our income method are very closely tied. So we like to use that. The problem is with the level of data we were getting, we were even kind of holding up the Tioga income method market with Williston data, using their sales ratio, or not their sales, their expense ratios, and carrying those over and trying to use local rents. And it got to a point where even with one response, we couldn't even come up with a rent ratio, let alone an expense ratio. What we found is we came to, who sat on the Board of Equalization at that point and asked for guidance. What would they like us to do? What was finally decided, and it was not an easy choice, nobody's happy about it, is that we return to the cost to replace, which is how everything else is valued. You do a cost to replace with a depreciation factor that trends with sales. So that's where we're back at. And so the first year you're seeing there is our first time coming off the income method and going to cost to replace. And so that was that first increase that you saw. And now, correct, in 24. And so now they are being treated just like every other commercial property in the city of Tioga, and will continue to do so until we were to be able to get a commitment from, I'm gonna tell you, I believe there's 26 apartment complexes in the city of Tioga. There's 26 apartment complexes across 7 qualities, because that's what our system uses, with a 7 quality factor, which we take into consideration as entities. You're talking 2 to 3 apartments, 3 to 4 apartments per quality. If I get 2, I have a high end, I don't even have a median. We are averaging. Anytime you take an average, it's not a great feeling, because those numbers are really hard to support. I can average that number and I can get you an idea, but then when you're applying that across so many, it makes it really rough. When I get 1 response out of 26, it's not enough. I can't possibly do it. And so unfortunately, this is not the best way to value these. It is the only way we have. If we ever got the apartment community back together and they wanted to try doing the income method again, and we could get a commitment from, we need 2/3 of the ownership to commit to wanting to do the income method, we could go back to that. The nice thing about the income method is you get those ebbs and flows. When the economy's not great, you're not making a lot of money, your valuations are lower, your tax bills are lower to try and get you through those. Then when, we go through a boom again and people are able to charge more rent and generate more income out of there, those valuations go up, the tax bill goes up, but you're making the money to sustain that, and you get those ebbs and flows. Without the income method, we don't get the ebb and flow, we just get the filtration.
Yeah, I understand. From our end, we obviously got the letters to participate in the income, but it being just partially company housing, that
It does get very
I didn't think it was reflective of what the market would be, so we
Sure.
didn't feel like it was,
And
we
I,
didn't feel like it was beneficial to use our data, basically.
sure, and I definitely do understand, and we do have of course, the city of Williston, I have 207 complexes, Tule is 26, but we do have some complexes that are that way. A company owns them and they are literally just trying to provide housing for their employees. It does get a little bit harder. It's one of those things, I do use that data when I do get it. We go through it with a fine tooth comb and we ratio it out. And so I would take some of your expenses and then the income from, so you rent some, but not all, is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, at this point, there's two employees, and it's been the best down each of like 4 or 5.
Sure.
It's been a few about. So then we have, like, for example, one of the apartments was unoccupied most of the time. It's used as basically a hell for
Sure.
executives to come in.
Absolutely.
So that, I guess we just that out of there.
Well, and so,
And then there's other ones that we furnish temporarily for like short-term housing, for
Mhm.
some, company that or whatever coming in. So
Absolutely.
it's very in flux.
I understand, absolutely, and, the good thing, the bad thing is, that, wouldn't scare us terribly. I could absolutely deal with that data. It would take a little more working with you to clarify exactly where we're sitting on those. But I have other complexes that we would have been able to analyze that data. I don't want you to feel like this is personally against you, because let's say that you had submitted all your data, that's still too.
Yeah, no.
It's still very difficult. So you are not, the outlier in this scenario. It is a very common.
I think there's one or
Concept.
2 companies that own.
There's one company, Olson something, they recently sold the apartments, but, they've never given me their data or
Which is
anything.
kind of interesting, because the
They
reality
use
is
like a rub market.
that's the thing, they could set the market with their data if they were to provide it. And so it does make it a little hard, it's frustrating, I can't imagine being on your side, because you're really in catch 22, there's really no alternative, we feel the same way. I find the income method to be extremely reflective of what the proper valuation on this would be. And, you know, the fallback is the top method. Because, apartments don't really sell in Tioga very often, and when they do, they don't sell in such a way that we can use that sale because, they don't allocate the fees in a way that we get to use that number. And so, I just want to make sure there's nothing in here, because, I'm sure there's nothing that can come. That's okay, and I see that the grades kind of we get here.
10 years ago, this is like, we don't know.
Yes.
I went all the way to this mark. That's about,
Yeah,
I
sure,
think I got it down like 2.6.
sure.
Well, and then the year after that, we actually moved to the income method because we actually were able to get a lot of people to, yeah, we were able to get more than half the business or apartments in Tioga to join, and it just slowly, progressively every year have lost one or two companies or one or two complexes have just fallen off. And so, yeah, year before last, I think, last year we got one response.
And this is a 12-plex, is that correct?
That's
Everything I'm looking on here, looks pretty close, so you'll have to bear with me. These are Leah's accounts, but apartments are my passion. I'm very, very fond of them, so I do most. Oh, gosh. I would love to buy one, but even at this valuation, or even last year's, I wouldn't be in that position. I just, you know, I have a county employee, but yes, I'd love to own one. I actually wouldn't, that sounds horrible.
905,400, it's yours.
How much did you say?
Well, just that, no, I can't speak for the
Sure.
corporation.
Yeah.
Just
No, yeah, I completely understand, and this is a significant increase from 1 year to the next, but it's. 21, I have. Well, and that's the thing is, yeah, and you can see where that income data just starts dropping off and that cost to replace kicks in, and it is devastating. I could,
And I suppose it's way too late now to, I mean,
for this year, unfortunately, it is because we've already done the model and we've submitted our ratios to the state. And so we are committed on the method this year. It would be something, I'd love to talk to you about it through the year if you have thoughts or insight, or if you know who we can talk to. If we could get some buy-in on it, I have to tell you, I feel like it would be beneficial to the apartment owners if we could get enough of the data. Like I said, I can't guarantee the rates are always gonna stay low because that's just not the way it works, but when you get those higher valuations, it is when the money is coming in a little bit easier, so.
all right, well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And we do the formal protest, I believe, is Mr. Sherman on the line?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, I am. Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, we can.
Okay, thank you for everybody's time tonight. My name is Richard Sherman. I am the owner of WP North Dakota. We own and operate a mix of apartment buildings and mobile home parks throughout the Midwest. We have properties in Tioga, Watford City, Alexander, in Western North Dakota, as well as Oaks, Ellendale, and Mayville on the east side as well. And I appreciate the information. Would you like the parcel number? Or do you have that?
We have that.
Okay. So every county that I've worked with on this does it a little different. On a formal petition or dispute. I did have a couple of questions. Is it okay to ask those about some of the information that you had mentioned earlier?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Okay. did I understand it correctly that the preference is to use an income analysis if available instead of using replacement value? That replacement value is sort of a last resort. Is that accurate?
On apartment complexes, yes.
Sorry, yeah, on apartment complexes. Okay. And you mentioned that apartments do not sell very often in the area in Tioga, and that when they do, they might not sell in such a way that you can use the data. Can you explain a little bit about why a sale would not be usable other than related parties?
Absolutely. And so, I don't know if you can hear me well. I can move the microphone.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you great.
Okay, I'm pretty loud, so that's pretty convenient. So one of the ways that you would, the typical way we see apartments not being able to be used is when you sell a complex and, let's say they sell, typically what's going to happen is they're going to sell and they're not identical. So they're selling and they're split across multiple lots. And so I have a valuation on each lot because each lot is its own parcel number, which is how the state requires it. And so let's say I have 12 units on lot 1 and I have 8 units on the building on lot 2. I don't know how much you paid for lot 1 versus lot 2. If you don't break that out for us, I cannot apply the ratio properly because I don't know where the ratio lands to those 2 buildings. Logic says, well, you just add the values together. Our tax system, our state, our ratio system, that is not an option. I have to have it allocated per person. Typically, our apartment sales do not come in that way. They say we bought this income stream. They don't have it broken out by unit. They don't have it broken out by parcel because that's not what they bought. They bought an income stream. And so those don't come in that way. And that reason, those sales are typically not usable for us because I can't allocate the ratio. That's all it comes down to.
Okay. So would those sales offer some kind of a guidance or outer boundaries if there was a large discrepancy between what the market is actually saying these units are worth versus what replacement value is? Does that offer any guidance at all, or is it just not usable because of the requirements from the state?
Sure. The problem is, what we have to take is how the deed is recorded. By the time I get it, the deed's been recorded for 6 weeks.
Got it.
I am the last person to get that deed. And so, we would reach out. The problem here is I can't tell you if I get 1 sale of an apartment a year, that's what the market's telling me. That's the only sale I got. It's really hard to call it an outlier when I don't have other data. We can look, we can guess, we can think. You're very hard black and white when it comes to that data. The data stream is really what tells us. Instinct is just that. It's a little bit of the guessing.
Okay, and the use of, and that makes sense, especially in Tioga. How far out of the city is data? You'd mentioned using, closer markets, Williston, maybe wider some of those as guidance or comparables, at least on an expense ratio. Is that looked at as well for comparable sale data?
It is not. So the state of North Dakota and Synchrony Code spells out exactly what we can and cannot use for our own market. Tioga actually has a large enough population that they get to be considered on their own.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just verifying with the assessor that that's. And so they have a population count where they say they have to be their own market. And so the city limits of Tioga would be the factor for here, which is the main reason we don't like using that expense ratio from the city of Williston.
Okay, so that is, am I misunderstanding then that the Williston expense ratio has been used in the past? Is that sort of an informal analysis to try and figure out expense ratios? Or is
Right.
it?
So basically, we have a couple of options when it comes to the income method. One of the options is we can actually use a regional company who compiles and uses their own data, and they create their expense ratio and sell that to us. I create my own expense ratio in the city of Williston. I do get enough references and data to be able to do so. And in my opinion, if a regional expense ratio is appropriate, definitely my Williston ratio is appropriate for the city of Tiger.
Are you able to
As
share
long
with
as we use their rates.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yes, sorry, as long as we can use City of Tioga's rents. So we would only use that expense ratio as long as I get actual rents from the City of Tioga's apartments.
And when you say actual rents, you mean responses to surveys as opposed to market data that's available? Is that
No, we'll
correct?
take both. We will take both. We spent, I think, 3 years where we would call every single apartment management company 4 times a year, so we could figure out what their asking rents were. And therefore, we could compile a median rent that was offered through that year. We stopped getting responses.
Is it allowable, or have you used the postings that are online for open units? Currently, I'm showing north of
Absolutely.
30. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So apartments.com is one of our favorites just because they have a reasonable amount of data, but you'd be surprised in the city of Tioga. We only have 26 complexes, 2 list on apartments.com.
Okay. I'm showing from looking that there's 37 available units in Tioga, according to multiple websites. That, obviously being in the business, we know that's not always accurate. Sometimes listings are just put up and left there for a
Sure.
long time. Is there, if you were able to get that, has that ever been used? Has that information ever been used to help calculate the income method?
It absolutely has that, as well as their own websites where they, if they list their rents.
And there's not enough, am I understanding correctly, that there was not enough of that this past year to calculate it based off of income versus replacement?
There really hasn't been enough to calculate for the last probably 3 years.
Okay.
We've been trying to carry that through and work through it, but the big problem is I can get your rents, but I can't get vacancy. We can't figure out what the collections are. And so we're going to then be assuming 100% occupancy. That's not fair either. What it really came down to is it felt like we were forcing a process that nobody wanted.
Okay. I would say we would probably prefer that over replacement cost.
I
think
would
that
agree,
is-
because replacement cost is not the ideal.
I think if replacement cost was objective measure of value, you would see building going on, and I don't think there's been any building going on there for quite a while from the multifamily standpoint.
Sure.
And this is, when we look at the valuations on the properties, this one specifically, we're looking at taxes for the past 2021, 1.5 million assessment, 2022, 1.7, 2023, 1.9, 2024, 1.3, and the new one going from 1.3 back to 1.9, which is a 47% increase, $600,000 increase in value. We have an appraisal from 23 showing a valuation of 1.35. The purchase of that property was 1.4. Seems to be a large disparity in what the market is saying the property is worth versus what the replacement cost is indicating. Is, with the limitation of sales in that market and your inability to get valuations from outside of the market from Williston, is there any other way to try and estimate what the true market value of the property is? It sounds
Sure.
like, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off either. I just like to talk.
Oh, you should cut me off. I'll keep rambling.
Okay, so basically, so what we're talking about here is we're trying to compare apples and oranges. When you're looking at a property appraisal, that is a single property appraisal, you're looking for the valuation of that single property and what it would sell for in the future. We're actually not technically trying to even do that. What I am trying to do is I am trying to figure out what I think it might have sold for in the last year based on the sale that we have. Keep in mind, we are not trying to figure out how much it's going to sell for. I am trying to figure out an appropriate ratio to apply property tax to. We are trying to set a value, but that's for our purpose. We are not doing single property analysis. One, we couldn't afford that. We have 46,000 properties in Williams County. If we tried to get a single property appraisal for every single one of them, taxpayers would go broke, our mill levies would be huge, and we couldn't do it in a year. Okay, that's not what we are trying to do. What we do is we are really just historians. I am just trying to figure out what I think it would have sold for if it sold in the year past. It is unfortunate that the apartments, some are getting lumped in maybe with other commercial. The thing is, you have to remember this sale for this apartment complex is in our sales ratio. Yes. Is in our sales ratio. It was considered. It is part of that puzzle that we use. Every sale for commercial properties is. So it's not that we didn't use that sale. We absolutely use that sale in the same way that we used every other commercial sale in the city of Tioga. No one sale has any more or less buried once we figure out it's arm's length. And so the reality is, we take that median sale and we bring that median sale. So let's say that the median sale sold for 87% of what it was on the roll for, or in this scenario, our median sale sold for 95. Well, we were at 95. What did we sell? What is the median ratio prior? What do we? So we had to have a 57% increase. That 57% increase was to get that median sale to that 95% ratio. The thing
And
is,
how
the
many-
state,
how many sales were used to calculate that median?
so 42 sales overall were used because, there are,
Of
We had to go back.
commercial broadly, correct? Not just multifamily. 42 sales
Correct.
of commercial. Okay.
commercial overall, correct.
Okay.
So the thing is, you have to remember, so out of those 42 sales, we use that median ratio. That means you now have one sale that's accurate. You have 21 sales that are under assessed and 21 sales that are over assessed. That is the monster that is mass appraisal, which is why I say in mass appraisal, I am not trying to predict what this property would sell for in the future. That's what single property appraisal is doing. All I am trying to do is make sure that we find a way to get an even basis to spread that property tax burden across evenly and appropriately. There's lots of ways you can do appraisals and you can spread tax burdens. This is the way that the state has found to be the most fair, the most appropriate to. This is the problem. If I went through and I said, oh, you have a fee appraisal, let me fix that. Who am I hurting? The person who can't afford a fee appraisal. This is how we make sure everybody has equal representation. I don't want to hurt the person who can't afford to get a fee appraisal every year. I am trying to do the best we can by spreading the burden equally across every taxpayer in the city of Tioga. We want to be fair to everybody, not just those people that can afford a fee appraisal, not just those people who can afford a tax rep to try and help them. We're just trying to make sure that we do the butter spread evenly across the road. That's it. And so I understand the frustration. I would love to have the income method back on. I do feel like it's the most appropriate. But the reality is, anytime we do take somebody in a different manner, even with the income method, we are causing something for treating them a little bit differently. The reason we can justify that is in multifamily especially, they're buying an income stream. Your sell and your income approach are going to come in pretty close together because they're using the same calculations to kind of figure out what to pay for it.
Agreed, but we're not using that method.
I agree. That's why I said I would love to use the income method. Again, I would like to use the income method. I don't like that we can't use it. If we could get buy-in and I could get 2/3 of the property owners to submit their data, I'd love to go back to it. I would gladly go back to it.
Is this a common issue in other cities in Williams County as well? Or is it something that seems to be more localized?
No, this is very common. I think the thing that you look at is we're a very conservative state. And when you talk about property owners, especially ones that own and live within North Dakota, that's
Yeah.
my information. It's none of your business. I can understand that. I don't go around waving my pay stub at people either. I don't want people knowing what I make. We're very private in that manner. And I think the problem is, it's really hard to talk to the person who can actually make those decisions. If I could talk to them, explain our process, explain why we do what we do, how we do what we do. And I can reassure them, again, Civic Code protects all that data. I'm not showing it to anybody. In my office, when that data shows up, it shows up on my desk. I analyze it. I lock it in a drawer. Nobody sees anything that's unanalyzed. That analyzed data is again showing that central tendency basically. I'd love to be able to talk to every property owner and explain to them what we do because I can assure you it is the most fair method. It doesn't work.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think that also often property owners believe that a response to that is going to cause an increase in their taxes that is going to be used against them in some way. And so it's better, for them not to reply. And I understand. I mean, we understand that. I would say that the fundamental value of a property is what the market says the value of that property is. And the inability to sell a property anywhere approaching the valuation given by the county is not in line with the standards for taxation. That there should be a strong correlation between what that property can be sold for at arm's length during a certain amount of time and the tax burden for that property. And we understand it's an imperfect system. From looking at our analysis on the property, we believe that the valuation, which is supported by the income stream of the property itself, comparable properties, both active and sold in superior markets to Tioga. And what I mean by that is stronger rent demand, higher rent per square foot. Williston's the main one there, that the appropriate valuation is 1.75 million, which is in line with 2022. That's our request. We understand, and I appreciate your time for explaining all of that. I know that it is a tough thing to calculate and one that you want to be fair with. I did have another question. You had mentioned and so that's our request. That's our formal request. And then the last part was you had mentioned an increase for townhomes that was, I believe, around 10%, maybe a little bit less. Are there other properties of that kind that, though not multifamily, could be used in the analysis? And if not, why do you think there's such a disparity between the commercial increase in the mid-50s and those increases around 10?
Sure, absolutely. So when you're talking about townhomes, typically, you're not talking about something that is owned as an income stream. You're usually looking at somebody living in one. Two, Century Code says though. Century Code says that if it is 3 or less family units housed in that property, it is residential. 4 or more must be commercial and considered as its own class. I cannot compare I cannot compare a townhome rent or otherwise to even a fourplex any more than I could a restaurant. You look at the income from one versus the other. Century Code has very clear definitions where they break those apart.
But again, we can't use the income.
We cannot, correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I am on your
say-
side. I agree. Because that's how we value
I
properties,
don't
right?
disagree. I'm sure we are on the
Yeah.
same side, and I'm sure that if we could use that income method, there's a possibility our valuations would be closer. I don't know, and that's the reason we don't use it, is because I don't know. I just can't be certain of that data, and I'm gonna tell you, if I'm not positive that it's right, I'm not gonna stand up here and defend it.
Well, I appreciate your time. We have our request, and thank you all for listening to me about this as well. I will commit to making sure we've taken over management of Prairie Flats directly. I'll make sure that we do respond to any requests from the county, and I will bring that up at the next association meeting for the multifamily owners for North Dakota as well. Is maybe a way that we can encourage greater participation, because I think that nobody benefits from the guessing to the degree it has to be done, and it's not fair on your end as well to not have the appropriate data. So we'll see what we can do. We at least add one more, maybe we could double it to 2 responses next year.
I'm telling you, 2 responses would be double.
Yeah.
All right. I really appreciate the conversation, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you all. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions in regards to that data or conversation? I know it's a lot to take in.
Procedures made. You'll need to move on a finding and on
So you will need to, since he did formally protest, you would need, and technically anybody who came up and made their concerns known has officially protested their valuation, and you should make a determination. Even the ones that felt like they understood what we were doing and they either agreed with it or chose not to proceed, you would still have the ability to make a change if you wanted to. So you would still need to say that no change would be needed on these parcels. So I believe we're up to 3, 4. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna switch back over to Leah then so she can take that back over, okay? Thank you.
you.
Can I just ask one question, because my internet slowed down and I think I missed a portion of that. The last fella that was up, Mr. Sherman, was the differential between the 2023 year and the current assessment for 2024, was that $600,000?
Mm-hmm. 600.
Okay.
It was 1.3 to 1.9. So 47% increase.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. I just had a hard time hearing that.
As Christie said, we will have to make some type of decision on all of the people that have presented tonight. So we can either start with Mr. Roloff, or we can start with Mr. Sherman, whichever you prefer. You tell me, Greg.
You guys got this, I'm just seconding what I'm terrible with phrase.
I will let you know that you guys can make any changes that you so desire tonight. You are the board. You can make any decisions that you so require. I will let you know that we put a lot of work into these numbers and we stand behind these numbers, but we understand if you guys feel that there is something out of alignment that you would like to correct. The only thing that I ask is that if you do make a change, let's make a change across a classification of property. So if you decide to change commercial, we change commercial as a class and not onesie twosies, these specific parcels that showed up. That to me is more equalized across the board than just correcting these few that.
I'll be honest, I think there was a lot of sticker shock when we saw this when it first came out. But
Yes.
I also think you guys did a phenomenal job of explaining and
Thank
what
you.
caused the increase this year because of the massive decrease last year.
Thank you.
Nobody's gonna talk about the decrease last year.
Nope, I didn't get a single phone call last year.
So no, I really appreciate that. It provided tons of clarity for me, and I hope it did for you guys too.
Thank you, I appreciate that, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really think I want to make any changes. It's where I stand up on it anyways.
Okay, what is the typical motion for reading as recommended?
That right there is, you would specifically state, you could specifically have a motion that says, for the roll-off property or for, Mr. Roll-off property, you leave it as an assessed value presented. That's one,
Leave the value as presented. Or no change to the value as presented, whichever, whatever.
Well, I'd like to move that the property of Lauren Roloff stay as is.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second that, Mr. Roloff's property assessment stays as is. Move to a vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. And
and then Kyle Ledbetter, he is with Murex Petroleum.
And they had two properties in question, right?
Correct.
Two.
We're looking for the one on 7th Street, right?
that's the,
Is that the apartment complex? Yep, so we can do that one first.
I would like to move that Murex Petroleum Corporation number 23 on 7th Street Southwest remain the same.
I second that.
all right, we got a motion and a second that the Murex Petroleum property on, what street did you say?
7th Street,
7th Street. The assessment remains the same.
yes.
Okay, motion to vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries. And we have,
And if you'd like to cheat, on page 22, I actually have a finding and a motion at the bottom of that page for Mr. Sherman's property. Yes, yes. And it's specifically just stated the protest listed there, which is for Mr. Sherman, it listed above.
So the finding of the motion.
Thank you, sorry. So if you read the findings, the protest item listed above, has been reviewed and there's no changes. These are reasonable. JD, you can use your own words. Sorry.
I move that a finding be made that the protest items listed above as noted in the minutes have been reviewed by the City of Tioga Board of Equalization.
I second that.
All right, we got a motion and a second for the finding on Mr. Sherman's property. Move to a vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And I do want to just clarify with Mr. Furman's property, that is no changes to be made on it. Correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, we have one final thing to do, but I wanted to ask if anybody had any questions or concerns that they wanted to discuss before we can close the meeting.
Got questions on that?
Okay, what are your questions?
Um,
So this is your final page. What this is doing is it is motioning and seconding all of the things that we've done tonight in this meeting. So the first is that you have looked at all of the classifications and reviewed them. And if they were needed to be corrected, we've corrected them in minutes. The second finding is for all of those exemptions that we looked at. This is just a blanket at the end of the meeting to make sure that we've covered everything that we need to. Number 3 is that the overall assessment role for the city of Tioga, as you've noted here and as we've gone through this meeting, is correct as you've seen it. And then the very last one is that you declare the assessment role for 2025 equalized. So these are just the specifics to be able to close this meeting and close our equalization for the year.
Okay, well, I will move that a finding be made that all property classifications have been reviewed and that they are proper as assessed or corrected as noted in the minutes.
I second that.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Can we just call it finding number 1? For finding number 1, we'll move to a vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next, I'd like to move that a finding be made that we have reviewed all exemption applications and homestead credit applications and find them proper as presented or corrected as noted in the minutes.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for finding number 2. We'll move to a vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next, I would like to move that a finding be made that the overall assessment role for the city of Tioga for 2025 has been reviewed and find it proper as assessed or corrected as noted in the minutes.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for finding number 3. We'll move to a vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
I also move that based on the preceding findings, we declare the assessment role for the 2025 for the city of Tioga equalized.
I second that.
All right, we got a motion and a second declaring the assessment role for 2025 for the city of Tioga equalized. Move to a vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Anything else? Nope, that's it. Now you can adjourn it if you're ready.
Ms. Walton, you adjourn.
I'll second.
Hey, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Move to a vote.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we are, oh, sorry, this motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:08 p.m.
Thanks, guys.